The phone rang, cutting through the sleepy silence of a quiet afternoon at the nursing home. I set down my leather-bound notebook, startled by the sudden sound. The room had been quiet all day, just like every other day. Spring sunlight filtered softly through the window, casting gentle streaks of light across the wooden floor. The wall clock had just chimed 3. I picked up the phone. My heart pounded, sensing that something was about to shift, and then I heard the voice, dry, distant, yet painfully familiar, and all the emotions I had buried came flooding back. "Mom, it's Andrew." Just a few words, but enough to leave me speechless. I hadn't even had time to respond when his voice continued, flat and transactional, like he was reading off a memo. "I've been struggling lately. Can you transfer the house to my name? Just temporarily, so I can secure a loan." I didn't answer right away. My eyes drifted to the old maple tree outside, bare and trembling in the soft breeze. I'd been sitting in this room for over 2 years now, and during all that time, Andrew, my only son, hadn't visited me once. Not a single call, not even a check-in. If you've ever known what it's like to wait for someone you love, only to be met with a voice as cold as the final winds of winter stay with us. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that speak to the quiet places of the heart, where unspoken wounds still live, because here we believe this: those who've been forgotten still deserve to be heard. Every afternoon, I watched through the hallway as Mrs. Blanche across from me received visits from her daughter, always arriving with a box of fresh apple pastries, and that curly-haired grandson who giggled like a cartoon sprite. I often pretended to walk by, holding a nameless book, but I lingered longer than I should, just to hear the sound of a family that once resembled mine. I used to think I had grown accustomed to the silence, but I hadn't. Not really. My hand moved to the photo on the wall, our last picture together. George and I, smiling broadly on our 40th wedding anniversary, fingers entwined like two people who had survived a lifetime side by side. 6 months later, he was gone, just like that. A sudden stroke in the kitchen, no goodbye, no warning. The house Andrew was talking about wasn't just a building. It was the home George and I had poured our lives into. Every dollar from our factory jobs, every coupon clipped, every winter night spent huddled under the same handmade blanket we'd saved and sacrificed to afford a modest little house in the Vermont suburbs. That house wasn't just real estate. It held our laughter, our arguments, our hard-earned peace. And now, my son wanted me to hand it over, as if it were just another transaction. I took a deep breath. On the other end of the line, silence waited. "I'm still here, Andrew," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just need to use the house as collateral," he said. "It's urgent. You just need to sign the paperwork. Once things settle down, I'll take care of you. I promise." I closed my eyes. "Take care of you." The words rang hollow. When had he ever taken care of me? When I slipped in the bathroom during that harsh winter, it was Andrew who urged me to move into assisted living. "It's safer this way, Mom. You'll have someone watching over you 24/7, he'd said. I hadn't resisted. I didn't want to be a burden, but I also didn't expect to be abandoned. "Andrew, the house is the only thing I have left. What if I need extra care one day, or more medical treatment? I can't afford to lose my last safety net." His voice sharpened. "You're already in the facility. You have meals, nurses, a warm bed. You're not missing anything. And besides, that house is going to be mine eventually. What difference does it make if we transfer it now?" I froze. That sentence, "going to be mine eventually," cut deeper than anything he'd said so far. It wasn't just callous. It reduced me to paperwork. It made me wonder, did my son still see me as his mother, or just as a placeholder on a deed? I clutched the sleeve of my cardigan and my voice trembled. "You talk like I'm just a name on a title." There was silence on the other end. Then his voice dropped, still calm, but colder. "You don't trust me, do you? You think I'm trying to scam you? I have no other options, Mom." I didn't respond immediately. I needed time, not to think through the legalities, but to accept what I already knew in my heart. "Give me a few days. I need time." 3 days, he replied, urgency creeping in. "I need the money by then." Then came the sound of the line going dead. I sat motionless, the phone still in my hand, my mind suddenly blank. The room was silent again, but inside me, a storm had begun to rise. 3 days later, the phone rang again, but this time, it wasn't Andrew. It was Melissa. I had just set my teacup down when the shrill ring echoed through the room. My heart tightened. I hadn't yet recovered from the coldness of the last call, but the name flashing on the screen gave me pause. Melissa Whitmore, my daughter-in-law. I picked up the phone, keeping my voice steady. "This is Mom." Melissa's voice came through, overly sweet and carefully measured. "Hi, Mom Margaret. How are you feeling these days?" I answered slowly, "I'm fine. Thank you for calling." She chuckled nervously. "We're so sorry we haven't been able to visit. Life's just been spinning like a top lately, you know." I didn't reply. I had heard that phrase too many times. Busy, work, life gets in the way. All very reasonable excuses, so reasonable they feel heartless. Her tone suddenly shifted, more serious now. "Actually, I'm calling to follow up on what Andrew mentioned. Mom, things are really bad on our end." I stayed silent. No questions, no interruptions. I just waited to see what number she would say. "We're in debt, about $300,000. It started with a string of bad investments." Andrew, "He really tried, Mom, but then the market crashed. He borrowed more to try and recover, but now—" Her voice broke slightly. "There are people showing up at our door. We can't even stay in our own home. We're sleeping at a friend's place." I closed my eyes. $300,000. That was nearly the entire value of the house George and I had worked our whole lives to pay off. That house had once been a dream, a sanctuary, a monument to our shared love and years of hard work. And now, my son wanted to use it as a final bargaining chip to cover his losses. And my daughter-in-law? She expected me to hand it over like an umbrella during a storm. "Melissa, why are you only telling me this now? For 2 years, neither of you called. Not even once." There was a brief silence. Then I heard a faint, almost embarrassed sigh. "We thought you were okay. You're being taken care of. You have a place to stay, food, nurses, and life just gets so hectic sometimes. You lose track of time." I gave a weary smile. "But no one should lose track of their mother." She hesitated. "You're right. I'm sorry. Truly." I glanced over at the old photo on the wall. George stood beside me, one arm gently around my shoulder, that warm smile on his face. He was gone now, but everything he left behind was still here. And now, it was up to me to protect it. "Melissa, I need more time. This isn't a small decision." Her voice suddenly grew tense. "Mom, we don't have more time. These people are dangerous. If we don't act soon, we might lose everything." I kept my tone even. "I understand, but I can't rush into this." "Fine," she said, her voice flattening. "We'll wait to hear good news from you." The call ended. I sat in silence. Outside the window, early spring leaves shimmered in the soft afternoon sun, but inside me, everything felt cold. That evening, I went to Blanche's room. The door hadn't even fully opened when she furrowed her brow. "Margaret, you look terrible. What happened?" I sat down and gave a small nod. "I need to talk, and I need someone who'll really listen." In that small room, I told her everything. Every detail. Andrew's call, Melissa's plea, the feeling of being treated like a living ATM instead of a mother. Each word I said felt like a stone being lifted from my chest, but also like it was wearing me down further. Blanche didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand, her gaze steady and clear. "Margaret, you're being put in a dangerous position. They didn't come to you out of love. They came because they want something." I nodded slowly. "I know, but I'm still afraid. If I say no? If Andrew really is desperate? Am I pushing him over the edge?" "No," Blanche said firmly. "You're not pushing him anywhere. He's the one who walked down that path. But you have every right to protect what little you still have." I looked down at my hands, wrinkled, freckled, the marks of age etched into my skin. These hands had cared for my husband, raised my son, folded towels, baked cakes, and now these same hands would have to protect me. My daughter Laura is visiting tonight," Blanche said gently. "She's a lawyer, smart as a whip. Let me ask her to speak with you. Don't do anything yet?" I nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. That evening, I was sitting in the common room when Laura walked in. She wore a gray blazer, carried a tablet, and had the kind of calm, focused eyes that didn't miss a thing. She approached me and shook my hand. "I've heard a little about your situation from my mother. If you're willing, I'd love to sit down and go over everything with you." I nodded, and something strange stirred in my chest, a feeling I hadn't had in a long time, the feeling of being protected. Laura gave me a kind smile, but her eyes held the sharpness of someone who knew how to fight. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly but firmly, "tell me everything. Then I'll tell you exactly how to protect what's rightfully yours." Andrew arrived at the nursing home with a bouquet of flowers in one hand and a pale yellow folder in the other. I heard the knock, just as I was pouring myself a cup of tea. Megan peeked her head through the doorway, her expression cautious. "Mrs. Whitmore, your son is here. He said he had an appointment, but he doesn't look like he's in the best mood today." I simply nodded, keeping my voice calm. "Let him in." The door opened. Andrew stepped inside, looking thinner than I remembered. His face was drawn, dark circles beneath his eyes, and the suit he wore was crumpled like it had been slept in. But what caught my attention most was his gaze devoid of warmth, filled only with urgency and calculation. "Hi, Mom." He placed the bouquet on the table, then sat down in the chair across from me. The folder was set precisely between us. "I came today to sort everything out once and for all. This is a simple agreement. My friend drafted it. It's just temporary authorization to use the house as collateral for a loan. It doesn't affect your ownership. You're still the official homeowner. This just lets me use it to get back on my feet." I didn't reach for the folder. I just looked at it like one might look at a knife wrapped in gift paper. "Andrew," I said slowly, deliberately, "I have legal counsel. The house is now in a protective trust. From this point forward, any transfer or financial use of the property must go through my lawyer." His face changed. The forced smile vanished. His voice dropped, sharpening. "You've got to be kidding me. You're going to drag your own son through a legal process?" I stood and calmly smoothed out the tablecloth. "This isn't legal warfare. It's self-protection." He shot up from his chair, both hands slamming onto the table. His voice grew louder, angrier. "Someone's been brainwashing you, haven't they? That woman Blanche? Or that damn lawyer? They're poisoning you against me with all this nonsense." I remained standing, unmoved. My voice was soft, but steady. "No one poisoned anything. Your silence for the last 2 years said more than anyone else ever could." Andrew stared at me, disbelief flashing across his face, as if he couldn't comprehend that I, the mother who once gave up everything for him, would dare say no. And the air between us turned thick, almost suffocating. He stepped back, snatched the folder, and shoved it into his bag. At the doorway, he turned to me. "Don't think you can stop me forever. You think this ends here? It doesn't. This isn't over." I didn't respond. Instead, I quietly reached beneath the table and pressed a small button installed just a few days prior. Beneath the tablecloth, the recording device flickered to life, capturing every word, every threat, every inflection in his voice. Less than 15 minutes after Andrew stormed out, Laura walked into my room alongside the facility director. She pulled out her tablet, typed a few lines, and showed me the screen. "I've drafted the temporary restraining order," she said, calm but firm. "With the recording you just made, we have more than enough evidence to file for immediate protection. All I need is your approval. We can submit it before the end of the day." I stared at the screen. Just a few lines of legal text, but the weight they carried felt monumental. Suddenly, something lifted inside me, like a boulder rolled off my chest. "Do it," I whispered. "I don't want to hurt him, but I won't let him destroy what's left of me." Laura nodded, her tone unwavering. "You're not being selfish. You're standing up for yourself, and that's your right." On that very afternoon, we left the nursing home and went to the bank that partnered with the facility. The branch manager personally escorted us to a private meeting room. A notary public and a financial attorney were already waiting to witness and finalize the process. I sat tall, my hands steady more than I thought they would be. With each signature I made, I felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself. The trust was finalized. All prior authorizations were revoked. Every account was locked down. Andrew's name was removed from every future inheritance designation, unless I personally instructed otherwise. Laura placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder when we were done. "From today on, no one touches that house without your consent," she said. "Not a brick, not a blade of grass, not a forged signature." I nodded, and I felt something shift inside me, not pain, not anger. It was clarity. For the first time in years, I knew I had done the right thing. When Laura and I returned to the nursing home, Blanche was already waiting at the dining table. She looked up, smiling brightly. "You went to the bank, didn't you?" I sat down across from her and let out a long exhale. "Yes, it's all done." Blanche poured me a warm cup of tea. "You're no longer the quiet shadow someone left behind. From now on, you're Margaret, the woman who drew her line." I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Not a polite smile, but a real one. The kind of smile that comes from someone who just took back the part of themselves they thought was lost. That evening, as I set my dinner tray on the table, Megan stepped into my room. She leaned in, lowering her voice. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's another phone call for you." I turned to her. Megan hesitated, her voice tight with concern. "It's Andrew, and this time, he says he's not coming alone." Andrew returned with a bouquet of flowers in one hand and a thick folder tucked neatly under his arm. His hair was oily, his chin dotted with stubble, and his suit hadn't seen an iron in days. The dark circles under his eyes were deeper than before, and his shoulders slumped as if the world had landed a punch he hadn't been able to dodge. I sat quietly by the window, spring light dancing through the lace curtain. My heart didn't race. It beat slow and steady, not from fear, but from resolve. "Hi, Mom," he said, forcing a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He placed the flowers on the coffee table, then pulled out the folder. "I've given this a lot of thought. I know I lost my temper last time. I'm here today to make things right. This is a simple agreement. It doesn't transfer ownership, just gives me temporary permission to use the house as collateral. You're still the owner. Nothing's being taken from you." I looked him in the eye. Not with anger, not with fear, just clarity. "Did you write this agreement yourself?" "A friend of mine who's a lawyer drafted it," he replied with confident certainty. "It's all legit." I didn't touch the folder. Instead, I spoke in the same calm tone I might use when making tea in the morning. "Andrew, I have my own lawyer. The house is already in a personal trust. Any transfers or liens now require legal review and approval." The frustration rose on his face like a storm surfacing. "So what does that mean?" "You don't trust me," I replied evenly. "You haven't given me a reason to trust you in over 2 years." His voice dropped, taking on an edge. "You're making this harder than it has to be. This was the easy way. Did you really think you could hide behind lawyers forever?" I remained seated. "I'm not hiding. I'm protecting. There's a difference." He slammed his hands on the table and stood. "Do you even know how deep I'm in? What kind of pressure I'm under?" I looked at the bouquet. Fresh flowers bought in a hurry, meant to soften a demand. "There are debts no house can carry, Andrew." His voice cracked. "I'm your son, your flesh and blood. Are you really going to just watch me go under and do nothing?" My voice was quiet but deliberate. "I've given you everything I had, but now I have to keep something for myself, something to live on." He froze for a second, then, like slipping on a different mask, he pulled out a second set of documents. "If you won't sign this, fine. Then I'll file for guardianship. You're elderly, Mom. I'll tell the court you're no longer competent to make decisions, and then I'll become your legal guardian, and you won't be able to say no." The air in the room dropped several degrees. I gripped the arm of my chair. "You're threatening to take me to court?" He didn't respond. He simply slid the papers back into his bag. "I don't want it to come to that, but if you don't cooperate, don't blame me for what happens next." I rose slowly to my feet. "You don't need to teach me the law. I know it, and I also know that no court will grant guardianship over a woman who is lucid, independent, and perfectly capable of managing her own affairs." His eyes narrowed, flashing with both frustration and disbelief. "Someone's been putting ideas in your head. You're not the mother I remember." I walked calmly to the door. Maybe I'm not. Maybe now I'm the mother I needed to become, to survive. He snapped. "You'll regret this?" I didn't flinch. "Number you will, for forgetting what's truly worth holding on to." He spun around, slamming the door so hard it rattled on its hinges. The flowers sat abandoned on the table, a symbol of an apology that never quite arrived. I exhaled, and then, without a word, I pressed the small recording button hidden beneath the tablecloth. Every word he'd said, every threat, was now captured, clear, undeniable, and legal. That afternoon, Laura, the facility manager, and I met in the administrative office. Laura presented the recording and accompanying notarized documents. Mrs. Whitmore followed all legal procedures regarding her estate, Laura stated confidently. Her son has no right to pressure, manipulate, or threaten her. We signed the emergency protective order. Within 72 hours, Andrew would be legally prohibited from approaching me or the facility. Any violation would trigger law enforcement intervention. On the drive back, Laura glanced at me. "Are you tired?" I shook my head. "Number, I feel lighter than I have in years." That evening, as I set my teacup down, Megan entered the room, her expression tight with concern. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's been another call." I looked up, unsurprised. "Who is it?" She hesitated. "Andrew, but this time, he says he's not coming alone." 2 days later, the podcast aired, and the silence surrounding me finally broke. The episode ran for just over 20 minutes, set against a soft piano melody. The host's voice, deep and calm, introduced it gently. "Today, we're going to hear a story that may make you pause. In a world that's rushing too fast, it helps to stop and think about those who are slowing down, not because they're weak, but because they've lived long enough to understand what truly matters." I spoke in the recording like I was speaking to myself, about how Andrew had called after 2 years of silence, about the cold tone in his voice, the hollow promises, and the contracts hidden behind the word son. I talked about George, about the house we had built with our own hands, every coat of paint, every autumn leaf we raked together, every winter night under the blanket I'd knitted myself. I didn't cry during the recording, but when I returned to my room afterward, tears quietly streamed down my cheeks. Not from sorrow, but from release. It felt like I had finally said what I had been carrying for far too long. 3 hours after the episode went live, a quiet stir began throughout the nursing home. A few staff members passed by my room, offering small, knowing nods. One elderly resident, who rarely spoke to anyone, stopped at my door, placed a single flower in the old porcelain vase on my table, and walked away without a word. That afternoon, Blanche practically pulled me from the common room. "You won't believe this," she whispered. "A woman visiting her mother was speaking with one of the aides. She used to work at Andrew's firm, and she said, right in front of people, that guy always smelled like fraud, fake reports, fake invoices. His wife was in on it too." I sat in stunned silence. The suspicions I'd buried deep inside were finally rising to the surface, backed by truth. That evening, I called Laura. She wasn't surprised. "I've already begun a financial investigation," she said. "If this connects to fraud, we'll have even more grounds to secure a permanent restraining order." 2 days later, Laura arrived at the nursing home with a thick binder in hand. She set it on my table, her expression firm. "This," she said, "is their credit history, loan applications, and 3 mortgage requests with Melissa's name on them, all flagged for fraudulent information. They attempted to use your house as collateral multiple times, but were rejected due to lack of verified ownership. You stopped them just in time." I looked at the stack of documents, my heart heavy, not with anger, but with sorrow, for myself, for the woman who had once trusted blindly. But I didn't collapse this time. I looked Laura in the eyes and said, "File it. Permanent restraining order for both Andrew and Melissa." Over the next 3 days, my podcast spread across Vermont's senior communities. Calls came in. One organization dedicated to elder rights invited me to serve as an honorary advisor. A local newspaper asked to reprint my full story as a memoir. Within a week, I had received nearly 40 letters. One woman wrote, "I gave my son the keys to the house. I now live in the garage." Another simply said, "Thank you for speaking up. You have no idea how many people you've helped." That Saturday afternoon, Blanche brought me a printed flyer. The cover read, "Granny's Voice. The Voices of Forgotten Mothers." Below it was an invitation to a community meeting. The tagline read, "If you've ever been treated like property, come reclaim your personhood." I sat in my armchair, hands trembling slightly as I read it. Blanche beamed. "It's beginning, Margaret. We're really doing this." Laura came by later that night. She sat next to me, her tone calm but resolute. "I just got confirmation from the court. The permanent restraining order takes effect tomorrow. They're forbidden from coming within 500 feet of you or this facility. Any violation is a criminal offense." I nodded, not with triumph, but with certainty, like someone who had just closed the last door that needed closing, not out of bitterness, but out of the need for peace. Later that night, Blanche and I sat together in the small garden behind the nursing home. Steam rose from our cups of red tea. The scent of lilac drifted through the spring air. Blanche looked up at the blinking stars. "Have you thought about writing this down?" she asked. "Not just the podcast. Something people can keep. Something they can hold." I thought for a moment, then smiled. "I don't want to be famous. I just don't want anyone else to go through what I did." Blanche nodded. "That's exactly why you should tell it. Because it's not just for you. It's for the next woman standing at the edge, not knowing whether to speak." The next morning, as I arranged fresh flowers in the porcelain vase George once bought at a spring fair, Megan entered the room holding a cream-colored postcard. "There's mail for you, from someone in Nebraska." I opened it. Inside was just one handwritten sentence. "I heard your story, and because of it, I now know that saying no is not betrayal. Keeping something for yourself is a way to stay alive." I clutched the postcard, eyes brimming. Just then, Blanche stepped into the room, breathless, clutching a stack of local newspapers in her arms. "Margaret," she said, eyes gleaming, "they want your story on the front page. Are you ready to be seen? My name is Margaret Whitmore, and I will not be forgotten quietly." I read that line aloud at the first official gathering of Granny's Voice. The room wasn't large, tucked inside our town's modest community center, but every seat was taken. Familiar faces filled the front rows. Blanche, Laura, Megan, and behind them sat women I had never met but somehow felt deeply connected to. They all wore the same expression. Once wounded, now awakened. We gathered in a room with red brick walls and golden light from vintage bulbs. On the tables sat warm tea, homemade cookies, and printed copies of the article that had gone viral since the podcast aired. The headline on the front page read, "I'm not a walking wallet. I'm a human being." Laura stood and spoke with the clarity of a seasoned attorney. She introduced the Evelyn Fund, created from the same $50,000 I had once planned to give Andrew. Now, that money would support elderly women facing financial or emotional abuse. She called me up to sign the first disbursement. I picked up the pen with steady hands. No more trembling. No more hesitation. No more guilt. When we launched the first issue of Granny's Voice, it was Blanche who designed the cover. She chose a photograph of several elderly women's hands, wrinkled, strong, layered together. Below it was the tagline, "Strength is not in age. It's an awakening." We didn't have a big budget, but we had time. We had purpose, and we had a growing network of women ready to reclaim their voices. I read every letter that came in. Some I replied to by hand. Others, I asked Laura to connect with local legal support groups. One envelope contained just a single-page shaky sentence written in pencil. "I wanted to die until I heard you speak." I pinned it above my desk, right next to the photograph of George, a quiet reminder that the smallest things can save lives if we're brave enough to speak. A month later, I was invited to testify at a city council hearing on elder protection. I wore the deep navy coat I had worn the day I said goodbye to George. Megan helped fix my hair. Blanche held my hand before I stepped up to the microphone. I didn't speak like a victim. I spoke like someone who had survived. I said that love is not the same as unconditional sacrifice. I said that silence is its own kind of violence, and we've endured it for far too long. I ended with the phrase that had become a kind of anthem. Saying no is not betrayal. Keeping something for yourself, that's how you stay alive. The room rose in applause. I looked down at the audience. A few younger women were wiping their eyes. I knew they weren't crying for me. They were crying for their mothers, their grandmothers, the silent fear they never dared to name. After that, invitations came from all directions. A local news station asked for an interview. A university requested me to speak at a seminar on elder care policy. I accepted only a few. Most of my time remained dedicated to the letters, to the women who had found their way to me, just as I once searched for something to hold on to. One spring morning, as I sipped tea in the small garden behind the nursing home, Blanche sat beside me, her eyes thoughtful. She placed her hand over mine and smiled. "You know, Margaret, I used to think strength meant shouting in the streets, waving signs. But now, I think strength is looking your child in the eye and saying, 'No.'" I nodded, squeezing her hand gently. A week later, I received a package from Nebraska. Inside was a folder, a handwritten journal, and a letter. "I was one of the women who heard your podcast. I never thought I could leave the life my daughter controlled. But because of you, I called a lawyer. I'm rebuilding, at 76 years old." I placed the letter inside my wooden keepsake box, right beside George's things. I knew wherever he was, he'd be proud. I never heard much else about Andrew after that, only a short news brief. His company was under tax fraud investigation. Melissa had filed for divorce. They faded from my life like a winter storm dissolving after spring rain. I didn't hate them. I didn't hold anger. I simply folded that chapter of my life like an old coat and placed it in the quietest drawer. On the day we released the 100th issue of Granny's Voice, the nursing home hosted a spring fair. I wore the sky blue dress Blanche had picked for me, along with a soft-brimmed hat trimmed in tiny flowers. At our little magazine booth, a line of people waited for signatures. I just smiled, amazed at how far we had come. A young reporter approached, microphone in hand. "Mrs. Whitmore, what do you hope people take away from your story?" I looked at her, then turned to the garden bathed in sunshine. Children ran past, their laughter bubbling like wind chimes. I smiled and said, "I hope they learn how to say no. And then, I hope they learn that they are worthy of beginning again." I used to think that staying silent was the best way to keep the peace, that if I loved enough, gave enough, waited long enough, people would understand. But the truth is, if you don't speak up for yourself, no one will know you're hurting. I'm not telling this story to blame anyone. I'm telling it because somewhere out there, someone like me needs to hear this. You have the right to say no. No to being overlooked. No to empty promises. No to being treated like a name on a deed instead of a mother with a heart that still beats. I said no, and in that moment, I reclaimed my life. If you're still reading, please remember this. You are not selfish for protecting yourself. You are not wrong for choosing to start over, and no matter your age, you still deserve to be respected. Share your story in the comments because you are not alone, and sometimes a single voice can lift another. Like this video if you believe strength doesn't come from age, but from awakening, and if you believe women who were once forgotten still deserve to be heard, subscribe to She Stories Margaret, where we share emotional, powerful stories from women just like you. Here, we don't just tell stories. We give the mic back to those who had theirs taken away. We rewrite the meaning of resilience. And we believe you can start again too. This is a fictional story that is not intended to offend or target anyone. It is created solely to convey a meaningful lesson to viewers, and all character names are entirely fictional.